Welcome back to Horses of Courses. I'm Tinia.
I'm Suzanna.
And this is technically your May episode, but Suzanna and I have been on the road traveling since Tuesday, and it is now Sunday. We've had all kinds of woes and some successes, and time got away from us, and we didn't realize that when we planned to record on the way back home, that would end up falling on June. So we started off Tuesday. I left Lesage, West Virginia.
I left Hart County, Kentucky.
And we converged in
Berea.
Yeah, Berea, Kentucky, on our way down to pick up a Killian from Carl Bledsoe, who's had him in training since around October of 24. And then there was a Mustang that was being turned over to us, and we picked her up as well in somewhere in Kentucky. And so, I picked up, to be fair, Susanna picked up the Mustang. I picked up Susanna and the Mustang and Killian. We headed back on Wednesday morning from Talking Rock, Georgia, all the way to Lesage. We unloaded Killian, and we unloaded the new mare. We loaded Rhapsody and Nissa and headed to Maryland.
Well, wait a minute. In between there, we cleaned the trailer, we filled the hay bags, we did all kinds of things in between all of that.
Well, I did neither. I did not clean the trailer.
That's true.
And I did not fill the hay bags. I was confirming, which I can announce now, I was confirming while they were doing this, Jesse Westfall as a judge for the Appalachian Trainer Face-Off this year. You may know Jesse as he's the husband of Stacy Westfall, and he has a whole list of accomplishments in the horse world. He's judged Road to the Horse multiple times, and I have been talking to him for years, just whenever the dates would line up, would he consider judging. So we're very excited about that. He's a super nice guy, and he's actually been the trainer for some of the folks that have ended up as competitors over the years. So we're excited. So that's what I was doing while Susanna was cleaning out the trailer and the caretakers were stuffing hay bags. I did load the horses. So there was that. I got out in time to load the horses. And then we drove on up. We were very thankful to find a long-term foster for Nissa that is open to marketing her as a companion horse, the Sevens Ranch in Maryland. And then we took Rhapsody on up to Wild Ride in Sterling, Connecticut.
Sailor.
And we also picked up Sailor, who was being returned. Her adoption just did not work out. And it ended up being kind of divine providence because Sailor was going to lay over at the Sevens. And one of our previous adopters said, you know what, I'd like to be her foster. Not only was that great for Sailor, but we ran into various types of tire trouble.
Yeah.
And thankfully, most of that happened when we were without a horse on board, or a mule, as it were. So what happened is we had a low tire that we changed on Wednesday morning, and then we traveled up to Connecticut, Rhode Island, came back. When we were coming through New Jersey, Susanna started hearing a noise. And, we were in bumper-to-bumper traffic with no way to get off of the road to pull off. There was nothing, there was no safe way to pull a truck and trailer off when we started feeling this noise, so we thought we need to get to the first exit. And unfortunately, as we are going, Susanna looks and is like, oh, crap.
There goes our tire.
There goes our tire. It was...
it didn't just shred, it left.
It left.
It left whole, actually.
Yeah, the whole tire, a brand new tire. And there was nothing we could do. We got off, we were in New Jersey. The folks at the tire place we went to, because now it's shredded the bolts off, they could not replace the hub. They could not even put the tire on. Their policy wouldn't let them work on tires.
We were the first horse trailer that ever pulled into their parking lot, actually.
Yeah, they were able to get us a new tire, so we replaced the tire on the opposing side of that lost one, so that there was at least a new tire supporting extra weight. And thankfully, again, we weren't loaded because Sailor was staying on at the Sevens with a new foster. So
also we learned that cheap trailer aids aren't worth the money that you put into them at all.
Yeah,
the real thing.
So we have a trailer aid. We've had multiple ones over the years. The one that's on the truck currently, we just put this one on in the back of the truck.
It's a knockoff version.
It's lightweight, so when you try to back up over it, if you don't have a really strong person, me, with your working boots on, holding it in place with your feet and bracing yourself on the trailer, it slides continually. So we got it changed. We are now headed back from our 5-day sojourn
on 3 wheels.
On 3 wheels, and we're very thankful that everybody's fine, and we'll be able to get it fixed. And we did a funny video on social media and to raise funds. So if you're inclined to donate, you can hop on there, see that on Heart of Phoenix. By the time you hear this, it may be weeks later, but it's on there. It's pretty funny. It's called You Pick a Fine Time to Leave Me Loose Wheel. So it's probably going to be around between the tire and the rim and the hub and the hours. And it'll probably be actually around $500. So if you'd like to donate, we would appreciate it. We are certainly tired. If you think about the trip from West Virginia.
Was that a pun?
What?
We're tired.
Tired. Oh, yes. Yes.
Well, it's
whether I intended it or not. And so the trip, I don't even know, down to Talking Rock.
Wait, I just want to know one thing. Ma'am, have you ever hauled horses in this trailer before?
That's what the little guy asked us in New Jersey. And I was like, I wanted to be like, honey, since before you were born.
No, we stopped somewhere and added that poop to it just for the ambiance.
Yeah, poor little fella. Have you ever hauled a horse? No, this is my first time. But again, there were no horses in it when all this happened. So enough on that. We're going to kick off this episode talking about red blocks.
I hate red blocks.
Well, I hate red blocks, and there's lots of reasons why. And I know we've talked in various capacities about minerals and needs and what horses need and what you should be doing. But as best Suzanna and I can remember, we don't recall actually just focusing on the red block and why you shouldn't use it. So the first reason blocks in general that are made for cattle are not a good idea, regardless of the components in the block, it is that they are made for cattle who have extraordinarily rough tongues and arguably a higher drive to even go to a block. But the blocks are made for cattle with extremely rough tongues. They can get far, far, far more from those blocks than a horse can. Maybe some of you haven't messed with cows. I raised cows for years. A cow's tongue is about 4 times the size of a horse's. They can take it out of their face, up their nose, and into their eyeball, and it feels like grating a cheese grater. So if a cow needs the mineral composition, they can get it, whatever it is that they need, they can get it from a block because of the texture of the tongue, the size of their tongue, etc. Also, what cows need, it's different than what horses need. So number one, blocks of any kind, whether it's white blocks, selenium blocks, any block is not made for a horse as a rule. Most of those blocks are made for cattle. So it's very, very hard for a horse to ever get what they need.
I will say, though, Luna will not eat loose white salt. She will eat the block all day long, but if I put out loose white salt, she'll just go without. So I don't know what the deal is. The white block. Yeah. I only put out white block. But it is, and some horses just, they're older and they've learned that's where it comes from. So ideally, if you have a young horse, introduce loose early on. I would imagine that's the deal. But they cannot get what they need from the blocks if that's the exclusive source of what they need. Now, there are horses in a desperation, too, that will bite the blocks and get chunks of it. But that really is not, that's not what was intended to happen. But I have seen horses that are, newly in the rescue, bite the blocks. So for one, there are also blocks made for horses, but pretty much when we refer to white block, red block, those are cattle blocks. So that's number one. But I'll let Suzanna talk
about, why, and even imagine that the red blocks were made for horses to get what they need. Why, Susanna, do you not want the red block?
Well, because what people don't understand about the red block is most of them are 97% salt and 3% trace mineral, and that's why it's called a trace mineral block. So there's just no way you can get all the minerals that a horse needs out of a red block with only 3% of it being trace mineral. You can't do that. But then also they're very high in iron, and no horses, unless your horse has had a major bleeding episode or is really, really infested with parasites, horses already have all the iron they need because they get it from their grass. So we're just overloading them on iron. They're not getting enough of any mineral. And
so think about this then. So explain why, if your horse has too much iron, what happens?
It robs the horse of the ability to absorb the copper and zinc. So you have to really up the copper and zinc to be able to balance that out, because then you'll get your feet are crumbly and the horse's coat is all orange, and all kinds of things happen when they're low on copper and zinc.
And how often, and there's this connection to iron overload and equine obesity and metabolic syndrome. So there have been horses that people have reached out, and they have horses where there's obesity, the horse's coat looks bad, and various things. And really, at the end of it, what you'll find is it's very likely they're deficient in copper and zinc, often because there's so much iron.
And the thing is that you can pull the regular blood work and it'll come back with a number for iron, but that's not the kind of iron that you need to test for. That's not really a very useful number.
Iron testing is pretty complicated.
You have to pull a ferritin uptake test to get the right iron testing. It's very expensive, and only one lab does it in the United States.
And so ultimately, when you're thinking about what a horse needs, and we want to talk more about this, like the whole idea of going overboard and over supplementing and getting your nutrition right in a different episode, probably next month. But when you are, how many people just say, well, I just have a red block out there. They don't use it very much.
I hear that so much.
Right. Get the red blocks out of your pasture. Get them out. Now this said, talking about blocks, we do have out plain white salt blocks at the rescue, but the horses always end up they have access to loose as well, and loose mineral, a very high quality loose mineral as well. So your takeaway from this, if you are using exclusively blocks that are made for cattle in your fields, that is not sufficient for horses. But specifically those red blocks, get those out of your field. You can use a white block and a mineral feeder with loose, and we sometimes even use the selenium blocks that do not have iron. And there are, they think of them as filling in a small hole, but it does not replace a loose mineral whatsoever. So, and like I said, in the instance, if a horse won't use loose salt, over time they may develop, interest in it. There are some salt options for horses that are solid, but even at the rescue, we do have the salt blocks out there. The salt blocks aren't going to hurt anything. It's not a good idea for that to be the sole way.
The white blocks.
The white blocks. It is not a good idea. And the same thing with selenium blocks. It's not a good idea for that to be the sole way for your horse to get salt and loose mineral. So get the red blocks out. You can always reach out to us or various equine nutrition options to get some advice as to what you can do. We use horse mineral tubs by ADM in all of our fields, and then loose mineral in our stalls, and salt options. So we are now, 30 days. We're at the 30-day mark for the ATFO, and we don't have the sponsorship forms up yet, but just be aware, we usually talk about some way to give in our episodes, and one of the ways, and the most meaningful way you can help us through the summer, is by investing in the Appalachian Trainer Face-Off. It costs us tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars, probably $50,000 to $60,000 when it's all said and done to host this event, but it changes the lives of up to 50 horses Well, in some years, we've had over 70 horses in this event. Yeah. So it's well worth, if you think about that, you know, $1,000 to absolutely revolutionize a horse's life forever. That is a very small investment. So it breaks down to roughly, for the purpose of the ATFO, roughly $1,000 that we need per horse to make it all work out. Now, that said, that does not cost, that cost doesn't cover what it's been through the, maybe the rehab process or the care costs of holding the horse if we've had it several years, if it's been with us a long time. Doesn't cover the vetting necessarily entirely, but it's a, you know, from the time we're leading right up to the ATFO through the end, about $1,000 per horse. And that doesn't cover the thousands of dollars of time that go into each horse that's unpaid by the trainers. So,
well, also we need to think about it this way. It's not only investing in the welfare and the education of the horses, but also the ATFO is designed to invest in the trainers. Like,
right.
We've set it up so that the trainers become better trainers and get feedback and learning opportunities themselves. So we're not only investing in our 50 ATFO horses, we're investing in thousands of horses across the United States that these trainers will have their hands on in the future.
Right, and that is something I bring up when I was talking to Jesse Westfall about judging, and I said, we look at this event as a way to help shape the rest of the trainers who participates training career, and every horse they handle thereafter should be made better because of the fact they took part in the ATFO, because of the feedback they received from us, because of the feedback they received from their judges. And this year we have added an extra component to help as the trainers go through the event at the 30, 60, and 90-day mark. The trainers have to supply videos that coaches. This year I think we've got Lee McLean, Patrick King, Nelson Detweiler. They are going to review the videos of the trainers and give them feedback prior to the event at 3 separate times so that we're helping shape the whole training in the best way possible. So that horse shows up and that trainer shows up and they do their very best and get those things corrected before the event, before, you know, in years past, they got all this important feedback, which made them leave as better trainers. But, you know, they weren't getting the feedback until the event happened. So this year we've added an extra layer of education, and so much of what Heart of Phoenix has.
I love education.
Well, Suzanna does love education, always learning, and etc. I myself, I fall into it because I must, because of what I do. I'm not as much a seek out information kind of person, but I appreciate having a whole team of people.
I beat her over the head with it anyway.
Yeah, she insists that we tear apart all kinds of things. Now, my nature is to tear apart the thing once it's in front of me and the task is there, but to seek it out before it's happened, not as much my forte. But Heart of Phoenix has turned in over the years. You know, we started as this effort on my end to just save horses and looking at it in what I consider a micro level. And we did that. And then over time, this very big force of here's information to make sure less horses even need our help. So that's kind of where we are today. And the Appalachian Trainer Face-Off is kind of the, you know, the pinnacle of that for us. So when you invest in that, you really are changing the lives of horses for decades to come. I have no doubt about that. We were actually talking about this case coming up where we kind of tell you about a previous rescue story on the drive up, because there was somebody who donated, a couple of people donated in memory of some horses their friends lost recently. Is that what it was,
yeah.
Susanna?
Yeah.
And we were trying to figure out when they mentioned a certain case, like which case is that? And ultimately the case, as best we can tell, was Sansa, who came in with her sire Steerit and Drogo many years ago. See, 2000, I think it was 16. 2016? Yeah. But one of the cases we went over was a case in Hampshire County, West Virginia that happened. It started happening in early 2010, and I ended up this is before Heart of Phoenix was even technically a 501c3 organization, but we were the only equine advocacy organization of any kind. And I don't even know the organization. We were a small advocacy group for horses in West Virginia. And there were no others at the time. And we ended up I ended up looking for this group of Arabians that I knew, because of my connections in the Arabian horse community, I knew they were being neglected, and I knew there were a large number of them. So a few horses trickled out that they would give away, but they wouldn't let people come to their property. And they would give the horses away and send like a friend to meet me with these totally emaciated, I mean skeletal horses, most of them being bred mares. So I met in like the spring, I believe, of 2010, I met someone near Hampshire County and picked up 3 from this herd, named the one mare Eclipse, found a home because, I didn't have a lot of space back then and I didn't have anywhere to hold these horses. Found a home, a direct placement for another mare that was named Mia and another, and a gelding named Orion. And I hauled them to that home in Milton, West Virginia. The mare was bred that I dropped off there, and the mare that I took home, Eclipse, was pregnant. And these horses were just skeletal, and the probably, even to this day, the heaviest parasite loads I have ever encountered in horses. It was just horrifying. Well, I found a home for Eclipse pretty quick once she was stable, before she had the foal.
No wonder she was beautiful.
Eclipse?
Yeah, wasn't she the black one?
Yeah, but she was homely.
Oh, I thought she was pretty.
Well, but she wasn't.
I mean, that's because you're an Arabian snob.
I'm an Arabian snob. But, yeah.
She didn't have the real typey head, which is not the kind of Arabian I like.
Yeah, no, to me, she was not a pretty mare, but she was a sweet, lovely, just angel of a horse. And so there was a long-time Arabian aficionado that was interested. She adopted her, and it worked out for many years. Well, fast forward, I was good friends with the Humane Society of the United States director, Summer Wyatt. And I said, Summer, yeah, well, and Suzanna knew her too, in a different capacity in her saddlebred show world. And I was like, Summer, we've got to find this herd. I know there are probably 50 plus horses somewhere, likely in Hampshire County, and I know they're starving to death. I know it. Well, Summer helped look and put out feelers, and come December of 2010, I got a call and she said, we found the herd and it's in Hampshire County and it's bad. So Sonora Wins, who was ultimately became one of our board members, she went up with me, also a longtime Arabian lover. So I did not know Suzanna at this time. We did have this common, theme of both knowing Summer. Went up to Hampshire County, and they had started moving the horses. And Heart of Phoenix could hold 5 horses at the time, so there were 26 left alive. The herd had been around 50 or 60, many dead, and there were 26 left alive. All of the mares were pregnant. Most every horse was a body score of 1 to 1.5, maybe a 2. A couple of the stallions were in better shape. All of the mares were skeletal. So the thing I had in front of me was, they were saying they were going to run them through an auction in like 2 weeks' time. I didn't have context like I have now. I really didn't know what to do. I was afraid the horses were going to die. I gave them some information about, what I understood at the time, to just get alfalfa for them and have loose mineral. That's something I came into horse rescue knowing because of my background in raising dairy animals, dairy cows and dairy goats. I was like, get loose mineral, a high quality loose mineral in front of them. The fact that none of the mares, not one horse died of refeeding syndrome, is still to this day a shocking thing to me, because the caregivers weren't really horse people. for the county. So I said to the county, give me this amount of time and I will find ways to get these horses into knowledgeable homes. That they were all straight Egyptian Arabians. And so I photo documented all of the horses, details about the horses, estimated ages, names that were maybe associated that trickled through animal control to me from the owners. And what to me, to this day, beyond the fact that none died of refeeding syndrome, skeletal in Hampshire County, and what now was, by the time it worked out, we were inching into January, terrible weather on this mountain. It was so cold. Got these horses, a lot of them blanketed. Some of them, some of the younger horses weren't particularly handled. But we were able to identify every single horse, who they were or who the sire and dam were, so that every horse from that herd, if the owners chose to pursue it, ultimately ended up with their papers or either reissued by Arabian Horse Association or were able to get registered. Anyone who pursued it. It was just, when I think back about it, just kind of amazing. I was able to find, Arabian horse enthusiasts across the country. Unfortunately, some were breeders, but that's just the way it was back then. But I kept up with the bulk of those horses. Now, they weren't placed by Heart of Phoenix. It was placed by the county. The county charged a fee, which to everyone who came and picked a horse up, and I did the screening and identified what horse it was that was going. And some of those horses, I still know where they are today, 15 years later. But what's, I think, beautiful about the story, and where Suzanna does know, some about these horses, is over the years, a few of them came back to us or their offspring. And that just kind of says how much Heart of Phoenix means to standby horses, just because we were there and facilitated their placement. To me, those are our horses. And if there was ever a point where they needed to come back, we were going to go get them. So an adopter for Eclipse reached out to me and needed to return her. And she had actually, as a couple of years later, had gotten a couple other Arabians facilitated like placement through Heart of Phoenix. They were, only one was on an adoption agreement. Well, it was probably 2021, maybe 2020. We went down to Memphis, Tennessee, and the lady was very old at this point and not in good health, and picked up, I think we brought back the only 7 horses she had left. And one of those was Eclipse, and one of those was Dior, which was the herd mate to a horse that Suzanna
stole.
Yeah, Suzanna's hop horse, Natez. So we retrieved those, and then one of the placements for a horse named Rainey reached out through the county, and it kept up with me and said, hey, Rainey's, the person who bought Rainey from me can't keep her. And we arranged to get her from Georgia, I believe it was.
I think so.
Got her back it would have probably been 2022. And then this year, one of the horses in the ATFO, Paella, she is the filly who is now 13 years old from, almost 14 years old, I guess, from Mia, who went to that home in Milton, West Virginia, and the owner still has Mia. Orion passed away some years ago. She reached out and said, hey, this mare needs training and work, and she just, can you take her? And so I was so glad to be able to show up and load this filly, who was only alive because we did the best we could back in 2010. And the mare was just very early bred, so and went and picked up the offspring, who's now 13 years old, and have her in the ATFO. So just kind of that full circle stuff. There are not a lot of groups that would do that and take it that seriously, but we do. And even though Suzanna wouldn't have been around at the beginning of all that, what I know she has seen over the years is how intently from the very beginning we meant to stand by the horses that we have come across. Whether they were really right technically in the rescue or whether we just knew of them.
Well, I've been on the end of that because you chased me down to find Tessa.
Right. Well, yeah. Well,
summer.
Right. And when we've told that story before, But yeah, I mean, she, to know, and I think that's why, well, kind of off on a tangent, but people will say to us, why do hundreds of horse trainers work with you? Why do you have so many volunteers across the United States? They could volunteer all kinds of places, and this is why. Good trainers don't want a horse. They don't want somebody calling themselves a horse rescue when they want a horse to go out the door and they don't care where it goes. And once it's out the door, it's out the door. Good horse people want to support an organization that means that when they say, I'm there for the life of the horse, and I'm going to stand by that horse.
It's something the trainers say to us over and over
again. Many times.
That's why I'm working with you, because I've seen.
Yes, and how many say, if I had a horse I loved, multiple trainers have said this to me, you've probably heard it as well, if I had a horse I loved, I would want Heart of Phoenix to be who placed my horse.
Right.
Buddy, that is an incredible thing to hear.
You just made that sound like the trainers don't have any horses they love.
Well, like not sales horses or horses. The horses they love, they don't get rid of. They keep those horses, But, they've said, if I cared about a horse and I knew I couldn't keep it, and it was a horse that had given me anything, through its life, I'd want Heart of Phoenix to be who oversaw that. And a few times that kind of thing has happened. Thankfully, they're keeping their horses, which we want them to.
Right.
They're horses that are actually their personal horses, because many of our trainers are in, they buy and sell horses. That's what horse trainers do. But they see a lot of rescues that don't even put the time in that they put into selling a horse. So that's just always been something that has stood out about us, and it should, to anyone in the horse industry. And I'm proud of that, and the whole team should be proud of that. Up next, we have our Ding-a-ling of the month. Well, first, I want to mention that the term Ding-a-ling of the month, it really triggered some people last month.
It did.
And first, I want them to know, if you're hearing this, it did not hurt my feelings. We got some laughs out of that. They're like, that's mean. No, you're missing the point. The reason Ding-a-ling of the month exists, it's somebody who has come to our page, trolled us, and being ridiculous to us. So it's not us we don't go to anybody else's page and troll them, So the way you make it to Ding-a-ling of the month is you have, usually intentionally, but sometimes not intentionally, trolled our page and been ridiculous to us. Usually very offensive, usually relentlessly so, usually. This month, the people, they didn't mean to. I don't think they meant to, but it's pretty, literally Ding-a-ling. Why, you ask, is it literally Ding-a-ling? So, one of our trainers took this little hackney baby.
Well, first she took Grits.
So she has Grits, and Grits had an issue where we felt like competition wouldn't work. And so he's a yearling or coming 2-year-old.
No, he's just barely over a year.
Just a bear. So he's a yearling off the strip mines that came to us from another organization. So he's a little gelding yearling.
Yeah, little gelding yearling.
She wasn't able to compete with him. So we got a replacement who was a recently gelded little hackney baby who's 6 to 9 months old.
No, he's a year.
He's a yearling too, but significant size difference, but not so much that you would think that that you were looking at a grown horse and a baby. But so the trainer posts that Grits keeps trying to nurse.
No, Dasher.
Dasher keeps trying to nurse on Grits.
Off his wiener.
Unfortunately. And, was Grits allowing it? I can't even remember.
No, he was kicking him.
He was kicking him. He was being hateful. And it was very clearly worded that Grits, you could clearly, if you read it, understand these are little herd mates, 2 little geldings. The number of people that went on that video, and they're like, if you don't take the baby off, the mare's milk will never dry up.
Yeah.
Don't you know anything? Don't you know that the mare's milk can never dry up with that baby still nursing? And I'm like,
she's clearly ready to get rid of him. Why don't you separate them?
Why aren't you separating them? And I was like, what is happening?
I thought people were being funny at first.
Well, and I did, I guess, until I got down further. So So here's the thing about Ding-a-ling of the month. Well, this one, because that is what literally Dasher was trying to nurse. It often comes. It's a way to make a lighthearted play on really people making comments they have no business making. You know, if you don't know what you're talking about, be quiet. and the flip side of that is because we are speaking to a combined audience of about 150,000 people, it's really important when we see things, we try to make it not super specific, but when we see things harmful in the horse industry, you know, we're going to mention it, and we should, and we always will, and we will not ever be deterred from that. That doesn't really give somebody a license. It's not, for one, it's not an attack, but it doesn't really give somebody a license to interject in some way across everything we do, just to be a jerk, their opinion over and over and over and over and over. If you have a platform, you should use your platform. That's what we do. As long as we have one, we're probably going to have a ding-a-ling of the month. But hopefully next month it's not literally about a ding-a-ling. Poor little grits. So
Dasher's the ding-a-ling.
Yeah, golly. Well, let me tell you, if you're looking for a real sassy little hackney, and I know you're probably not, that's the one. And you can find him in the whippersnapper division of the ATFO with Kirsten Heath.
Buddy, if you ever define a whippersnapper, that one's it.
That one is it.
He's a whippersnapper.
If you haven't been following the ATFO, I feel like the competitors are doing an awesome job. Remember, you can go to AppalachianTrainerFaceoff.com, and then you can search based on what team you want to follow, their hashtag Hop Team, whatever the horse's name is. And also we have Rider Wars going on. You can follow the Rider Wars by hashtag Hop Team and the Rider Wars competitor's name, and they're doing a great job. We will wrap this podcast up with our main subject. I think it's kind of complicated, but it's just been on my mind a lot. When I first started doing horse rescue, and I would say Suzanna would echo this when she first started into horses, what you don't know, you don't know. And if you don't know to seek out answers, the horse doesn't have an advocate. And I sadly have to say there were years in rescue where I didn't know what to look for, and I didn't know what to ask the vet to do to make sure that horses really were comfortable, that conditions were diagnosed. Do you know how many people, though, go their lives with conditions not diagnosed because they don't know how to advocate for themselves? Suzanna has a story about her daughter.
Yeah.
Where experts didn't, or, you know, like you think you're dealing with experts. But talk a little bit about that, and I have a similar one, and I think that will play into what we're talking about in advocating for your horse and making sure you're getting diagnostics.
So my daughter was waking up for years at 2 or 3 in the morning with really severe vomiting, diarrhea, and just had horrible stomach pain all the time. Her joints were aching. She just felt like crap. And she kept going to specialists and specialists and specialists, and even mentioned to one specialist, could this possibly be alpha-gal? And that specialist was like, no, you don't fit the parameters. And finally moved to Kentucky and went to another specialist in Louisville and said, I'm waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning with severe vomiting, diarrhea that goes on for hours and hours. And the specialist was like, well, that's the hallmark ding, ding, ding for alpha-gal. That's the first thing I'm going to test you for. And that's what she had, was alpha-gal. And unfortunately, because she lived for 5 years with alpha-gal, it's very, very, very unlikely that it'll ever reverse, even if you do all the things perfectly, which if you catch alpha-gal early, a lot of times you can reverse it, but not in her case.
Well, and in my instance, and keep in mind, we're talking about people who can use words to describe their symptoms, and still we end up not diagnosed, and we end up just acting like it's fine.
Well, so, she had to keep going back to a different person and a different person and a different person.
And imagine if she couldn't have advocated in that way, nothing would have happened, and it could have killed her. I mean, it could have, I'm sure.
It could have. She's been in anaphylactic shock and stopped breathing once and been in anaphylaxis multiple other times.
And so in my instance, I have had lifelong, from the time I was a little tiny girl. I mean, I had lots of things. I mean, I had severe asthma. I was in the hospital very, very frequently, for days or a week at a time with asthma attacks. My whole life, from the time I could use words, my mom will talk about, I would say how I hurt. My whole body hurt. My whole body hurt all the time. My joints hurt. My muscles hurt. I had constant headaches. I had issues with my knees dislocating constantly. And there were various other things that symptoms came up, and what they would always say, my mom would take me to the doctor and they would say, it's growing pains, or she's just making it up. Well, it took me until I ended up diagnosed with an aortic aneurysm in 2009, when I was pregnant with my third son. Still no diagnosis. They're like, well, we don't know why you have it. And I was probably, I was close to 40 years old before there ended up being genetic testing, where I just went in and I said, I feel fairly confident that this is what I have been dealing with my entire life, which is vascular Ehlers-Danlos. And sure enough, that's what I had. Why was that important? Well, so there's no treatment. It won't change my outcome. But then I knew that my kids needed the genetic testing to see if they had it. And unfortunately, my youngest son has it. But if I had been unwilling, even though my outcome doesn't change, and an earlier diagnosis would have just let me know what to look for, because aneurysms are, that's the kind of the ultimate end for those with the vascular EDS. But my son wouldn't have known. So talking about that, understanding that we as people can be our own advocates. If you own a horse, you need to. But what I keep running into are people aren't willing to pursue the diagnostics. And what I am finding is because they don't want the news. They don't want the news. Well, the horse is a little bit something in the back end. Have you x-rayed the back end? Have you done flexion? Have you done a lameness exam? Have you done lameness with equinosis? Have you taken the horse to a lameness specialist? Have you explored what's actually happening? And what we see when you start exploring these things, often the horse has something wrong that means they cannot be ridden or actually live with a high quality of life.
Well, I mean, not even to that level. If I didn't know that, if I hadn't had the x-rays and know that Luna has ring bone, and the reason why we thought to do the x-rays is, number one, I knew her history had involved a whole lot of wear and tear because they repeatedly trick-reared her to get tips. But second of all, her hooves had a really funny wear pattern. And if I hadn't have known to get the x-rays for the ring bone, then she would probably already be gone because she'd have been so painful I'd have put her to sleep. But now that we know that, my farrier can manage her hooves in a certain way to give the ring bone not so much, I don't know what the right word is, but not so much torque, so that she's staying comfortable much longer than she would.
I think it's taking impact off of the joint there,
taking
I'm
impact,
assuming.
maybe.
Well, and I don't want, when you all hear this, don't think, ring bone typically could not be managed in that way. But an x-ray would tell you if it could.
Well, it's going
like
to
an
get
x-ray,
her.
yes. But
But we've slowed it down.
It's the x-ray is paramount to knowing where the issue is, in where exact. Ring bone can be all kinds of, I've seen wild stuff and very minor stuff. So yes, like you have to do the diagnostics, but you have to advocate for those. And how many horses get turned over to us where the owner will describe a behavior? Well, we had a Mustang turned over for the ATFO. They described an intense bucking episode, and they thought it was related to the environmental factors for the bucking. What we found, because when a horse comes to Heart of Phoenix, we do an exhaustive lameness exam with equinosis, with x-rays, with ultrasound, with flexion, depending on what's rated. And we found that the horse was absolutely wrecked in the hind end. Yeah. Dr. Walker said no one should ever have been on this horse in this condition, and euthanasia is the only option. This horse will not be able to be pain-free. But he was being ridden with a child rider.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there are a lot of things that are going undiagnosed simply that exist and the horse is dealing with that could put them in terrible pain. And people will say, well, they looked fine out in the pasture. That is not a way to gauge whether your horse is okay. That is an ignorant statement. I have made that statement myself, so I'm not being like aggressive to the person hearing it who's made it, because I have done it.
I've heard her do it.
Yeah, I've done it. They looked fine out there. I had, and I don't know if I've told this story. I don't know for sure. Maybe I have. That we take it so seriously to try to do all these diagnostics, but sometimes we don't. We had this beautiful little black Arabian come in. I named him Toby. You know, from this episode alone, you'd know I love Arabians. That's what I like. I was that cute who read the Black Stallion. And he came in. He was relatively unhandled. He was intact. We had him gelded. I took him to my house. He wasn't handled enough to do a lameness at the time. So we had him gelded. I thought, well, I'll take him to my house. I'll let him grow up, because he was a 2-year-old. And when he's, you know, better handled, we'll do everything else. Well, so what happened is I have a very hilly place. Toby cantered, galloped all over that property. And he looked fine. Well, it took almost 2 years, or maybe it was right at 2 years, before Toby was, you know, we felt like, because he was weak in the hind end. You know, you'll remember, like, he was weak in the hind end, but he was starved. So we're like, well, he's vitamin E deficient. It would make sense that he's weak. He looked great in the 2 years as time went on at my house. So even though he was vetted during that time twice, I didn't have them do a lameness, because I'm like, it's a young horse. He was relatively unused, and I'm watching him out in the field. So we skipped doing a lameness, because I was not seeing lameness. And I think that's the important thing. I wasn't seeing any lameness. So I sent him, not for me, he was a foster for the rescue. We had a particular trainer foster that I knew would be great for this horse. He had a great mind. He was so smart. And we waited until she had an opening. He went last year as a showcase horse for the ATFO. And she started him under saddle. And you know what she kept saying is he keeps bucking at the canter. But he looked sound in the videos. Looked sound. Well, we got this wonderful application on him, and it was just, we were so excited. It was an endurance home, and the vet said, best client even had. Couldn't ask for a better home. I was so excited, all this time into Toby, and I just loved this horse, and, you know, we were going to get him the best home. So now she wants a pre-purchase exam. And I was honestly a little bit flippant about it. But I encourage a pre-purchase. I wasn't discouraging the pre-purchase. I was like, well, Toby will pass it. He's been at my house for 2 years. Super sound. Couldn't be more sound than Toby. And I stood out there at the ATFO last year. It was on the Thursday, kicking ATFO off. And they flexed him. And when he was flexed, he could not walk.
Well, and I was way far away watching this on the hill. Couldn't really tell which horse it was. But when they flexed him, I was like, oh, crap, that horse is broken. Who is that?
Totally broken. And so he couldn't move. And it was both sides. And so Dr. Walker's like, well, let's do x-rays. And he was just, his stifles were bone on bone. There was reaction in the stifles. This horse was hurting. It was impossible, but that he was hurting with every step, but he had learned to accommodate and look fine until that flexion was done, and that was a discomfort he was not used to. There was no way, and people will say, ride the horse, not the x-rays. No, ma'am. You ride the x-rays. That's what you ride. Now, are there x-rays where fusing has happened and various things where the horse has ended up comfortable? Sure, that happens. People say, well, if you flexed me, I'd be uncomfortable. You're a person, you can talk. Flexion is so important because it tells you where the joint, or it can tell you the joint you need to check into. And usually what I find is that as a horse that it is impossible they have been comfortable. And I know lameness, and I know horses and I didn't see it. And it broke my heart, because he had been trying to be a good boy, carrying a rider, and looked sound, and he was bucking at the canter, but looked comfortable at the canter. But his bucking at the canter was to say, this is not comfortable for me. And instead of just thinking this is a horse newly started, and this is just, all these things. And, when I say it now, it's like all these red flags. So when I beseech you, make sure the horse you're riding has had a lameness. Make sure the horse you're riding has had a lameness. Make sure that they've had flexion by a good lameness vet. Make sure that the horse isn't hurting and you just don't know. And at the end, remember, and we did an episode on this a couple back, you can never rule out pain. Not in a horse. You cannot ever rule out pain, but you can do your darn best to discover if there is. Kind
of on the lower flip side of this, though, I have my little Morab mare, who has a whole lot of, she's not a very fast mare, but she's got a lot of spring in her step when she goes down the trail, and she goes at a normal pace. And what was it, 4 years ago? All of a sudden she started just poking down the trail, like poking so bad. And I would have to get after her to get her to keep up with everybody. And I had her to the vet, and they couldn't find anything. I had a farrier at the time. They said she was fine. People just kept saying, well, she's getting older and she's slowing down. And I'm like, something is wrong. There's something wrong with this mare. I don't know what it is, but something's wrong. And then I switched farriers, and the first thing she said is, look at the ripple in her coronet band. She's got so much pressure on the outside of her coronet band. She trimmed that off, and in 3 days, I had my horse back. It was crazy.
And you've written about that on Hop. And so the thing is, there are people that say to us, well, I love my vet. I love my farrier. And we can look and see on the outside, the care they're giving is not good. There are people we care about dearly that are receiving care where we can see that it's hurting the horse, but they are so married to their professional that they are not advocating for their horse and saying, hey, I like you, but you're doing my horse no favors.
Yeah.
And that's true of human practice. I've known people who are good friends with their OBGYN or their dentist who have gotten care that wasn't the best. They're like, hey, you're my friend, but I've got to go somewhere to get this fixed.
Look, there's a lighthouse.
Oh, look, how funny. So just so y'all know, on the trip to New England, I've been to New England before, but not along the coast, and I'd not seen the lighthouse. So I was very thrilled when I would see the lighthouses in New England.
But now there's a lighthouse on this church.
But there is literally a lighthouse on this church here in West Virginia. But, so to kind of summarize, the point of this is, just because you didn't know doesn't mean there wasn't a problem present in your horse. We'll have horses turned over to us all the time where immediately when we do diagnostics, there's a horrible prognosis and somebody was riding the horse.
Well, I live in Kentucky, and most of the horses come first to West Virginia. We'll get a new horse in, and I'll be like, every picture of this horse, his left rear leg is up under himself. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
And then we do the diagnostics, and that left rear leg is broken. And it's just but the people who turned him over are like, oh yeah, he's been ridden a lot. He's wonderful. I just can't afford him anymore. You'll be able to rehome him, no problem.
Exactly. Well, and we went through this a lot lately where people have turned older horses over to us and said they were sound, and they get so angry when our diagnostics reveal the horse has been living in pain and that, euthanasia is the correct answer based on our protocols, and I would argue should be all people's protocols, but that's up to y'all. And it's like, we're not responsible for your lack of diagnostics and knowledge. That is not our fault that you did not have the knowledge or the diagnostics or the interest in doing the diagnostics to get this answer. But we're going to advocate for the horse. And here's the thing, when you advocate for the horse, it's going to hurt your feelings. It is going to hurt your feelings over and over again, especially if you deal with large numbers of horses. Case in point, I love Maribeth Pepler. Maribeth is a trainer who's worked with us for, I think this is coming up on her 7th 7th or 8th year at doing the ATFO, Maribeth has such a high standard for soundness. And how many times she said she's lost clients because she said, your horse isn't comfortable and I'm unwilling to train it.
Yep.
And there are a lot of trainers that won't do that, either based because it would cost them business, or they just simply don't know. And I want to believe a lot of it's more that they simply don't know. But Maribeth really she advocates for the horse, and she's not riding that horse if it's not comfortable. Period. The end. And I love that. And what I want to encourage is
that's where Nissa was that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we took Nissa up, and we were in this way. And sometimes I think this is a good way to end. Kind of wrap this up would be, and we don't have all the answers yet with Nissa, but even when you're doing lamenesses, horses can pass, but there can be something that's slowly degenerating. And maybe they passed it now, but then 2 years later. So what has happened with Nissa, and we don't have the answer yet, and I hope to give you an answer one day in an episode. Nissa came in 2021, and she had been unstarted. She had been turned over by somebody who bought her at an auction or a kill pen scam, and they couldn't handle her. They kept the baby, and they turned her over to us. Her feet were in terrible disorder, and she just didn't know anything. You could lead her, but that's about all. We had her started, and in the ATFO, the guy who started her, she ended up bucking him off pretty bad toward the end of the 100 days, and he said, I just think this is above my, my training skill set. So he turned her back over. We explored comfort, and we did find that, her front feet were pretty sensitive. We put her in some shoes, sent her on to a different trainer. That trainer worked cows on her and really got along with her well, as best we could tell. She ended up getting a home directly from that trainer. The home couldn't really do anything with her. They couldn't even handle her on the ground. And I don't know that they ever even tried to ride her, but they couldn't handle her on the ground. They returned her. She came back. They had taken her shoes off. We got her back in shoes, got her into some work with trainers on site at the main facility, and she was doing well, very particular about saddle fit, rode a lot better bareback, but with the proper saddle fit, could ride, and she was with us a long time. I would say we had her back maybe 2 years. I mean, it was a long time. We did a lameness on her again. She passed, and had her in work. She was riding walk, trot, canter for one of the trainers that we have that come out to Mulligan. She ended up finding a home. The second adopter came out, rode her walk, trot, canter, and took her home. It unraveled at the canter. She would bronc and get the girl off. I went to pick her up. They'd taken her shoes off again, put her back in shoes, and I did another lameness. Seemed, she was sore, like her back was sore and things, which made sense. She was sound. Sent her to Maribeth. And Maribeth is just like, there's something wrong. The horse is not comfortable. And I don't feel comfortable continuing with her under saddle, which was, that was a fair thing. I can't remember specifically what were you saying. She said she felt like
her body worker found something in, I can't remember if it was a rear right or a rear left, but her body worker found something that was resulting in her having back pain coming from the leg.
As a guess, with it being a body worker, which is not the same as a vet, but there was something there. Well, so here's the thing. So she came back to us almost a month ago at the rescue. She's just been turned out and looked sound.
Yeah.
Looked sound. Did she have shoes on?
I can't even remember.
I think they had pulled the shoes. So we hauled her up to a foster who can go through more diagnostics, and really will just, again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, if she's a companion horse, because we have done enough with her to have felt confident that as best we can determine, the horse seems comfortable on the ground without a rider. So that's as much as we could do with diagnostics, with good people we trust. Thorough diagnostics. With people that tend to find the answers. But what? She came off the trailer, was not sound. After the trailer ride,
especially in one rear. I can't remember which one.
And so, you know, now we know. Now we finally have seen some discomfort evidence to say something in this back end, whether it's stemming from the back or what, something. We have somewhere to explore. But that has taken 5 years to come to kind of a head. So, you know, hopefully we'll get to update you and say what is wrong. But you can't just say, well, once 5 years ago or 2 years ago or last year, the horse was comfortable, I did these things. It can change. It can change very quick. I've looked at x-rays from year to year and seen how dramatic things can change from nothing to something, or from a little bit to a lot. Anyway, we just encourage you. We are always happy to recommend veterinarians and farriers that we have worked with. You can never go wrong, I feel like, if you go to Dr. Freeland at Haggard to get the answer if you're dealing with
Buddy, he'll
something.
Chase it.
Yeah, Dr. Freeland, he probably doesn't want more work, but he's the guy. I know we've mentioned him at least once before. He's going to chase down the answer. And there are many good veterinarians out there, and good lameness veterinarians, and good farriers, but just... You know, be willing to...
When someone finds the problem, though, don't get pissed off at them for finding the problem. What if we just said to Mary Beth, well, you're an idiot. Why would you, well, you know...
When she said that's what some people do to her.
Yeah, but, like...
We were appreciative.
Thank you. We're like, thank you. And she's like, thank you for not saying, how dare you say this?
Yeah, like, don't get mad at the person blowing the whistle.
Right.
You know, and that was kind of, you know, when I was going over things with Suzanne about, like, what are we going to talk about this episode? It's people getting angry when you find the answer.
We've had that happen a lot lately.
Yeah. So don't get mad at us when we find the answer, or when we suggest that there is a problem. You know, or anyone, the whistleblower, they're trying to advocate for the horse. All right. Until next time, I'm Tinia.
I'm Suzanna.
And this is Horses of Courses.